Okay, delighted to see everyone on this auspicious start of our 13-month program. Okay, very wonderful, very ambitious. Hello, Linda and Dave. Haven't met you before, have I? I don't know. Happy to see you. Okay, darlings, Michelle, all of you, I'll get to know all of you. I'm happy you're all here.
Welcome,
Some of you are
Venerable, and welcome. I'm just going to do a short introduction.
Absolutely, yes.
So welcome to this 13 months long journey with Venerable Bobina. We've been looking so much forward to do this course with her. And my name is Lars, and I'm the program coordinator based in Denmark. And that means I'm remotely operating for the center in Zurich. And LACSAM is a study group under the FPMT. So we are both offering online courses and on-site courses and a hybrid. So brave new world. And we've been looking forward to having this course with the Venerable, both on-site and online as well. And we have so much gratitude for Venerable to doing her teachings for the center. She has been doing it in the past and now for the next 13 months. And she has been instrumental in the process of founding LACSAM, actually, because it was because of a trek with her in Nepal that the founders of LACSAM chose or were urged to form this center and find a location, do a web page. So thank you for that, Venerable. It's really nice that we do have another center in Switzerland. And although you might already by now know Venerable Bina, I would like to say that she has been a Buddhist nun for 30 years, studied under Lama Yeshe.
44 years, last.
Hey, wow.
44, darling.
Oi, time's running.
Time goes quickly.
Yeah. And Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa has been the editor of Wisdom Publications and also founder of the Liberation Prison Project in the US and been instrumental in making it an institution and bringing the Dharma to inmates in those institutions in the US, and has also been
in Australia and other countries.
Australia. Wow. And there's even a documentary about Venerable called Chasing Buddha, which you can download online or buy from the webpage. And since we tonight are 76 persons wishing to join, it shows the importance of doing Discovering Buddhism, this basic study from the FPMT. So that's quite nice. And we've been a team working for several months preparing this course, making it worthwhile and getting all the little details set. And tonight, I would like to introduce you to one of the key members of this team, who is Tara.
Hello, Tara. Hello, sweetheart. What's Tara's job then?
Hello.
Tara is the coordinator of the Discovering Buddhism. So someone to help me assist with this part. So
yes, thank you. Yes, hi, Venerable. Welcome. I'm Tara, and I'm the DB coordinator.
Good.
Yes, I want to welcome everybody. I welcome.
Are you in Zurich, darling? Are you in Zurich? Good.
No,
wonderful.
I'm in North Cyprus, but I am.
Oh, North Cyprus. Oh, how wonderful. I
am American from California, but I've been here 10 years.
Okay. How interesting. Good job.
Yes, well, welcome. We're very excited. I also want to throw in a quick thank you to all the volunteers at LACSAM for putting this together. This has been an amazing journey while we start our new journey tonight. So you just heard a little bit about me. I am from California. I am in North Cyprus right now. And I just want to say we are blessed to start this journey together, these 13 months. I think we've all been in a bit of anticipation, as I have also been receiving emails with such excitement. I plan to be here as a coordinator. I reply to your emails, okay? You can contact me for anything. I will be in the sessions on Tuesdays and also the intensive day practice also, okay? Also, a couple of quick.
Explain that to us so I can hear it as well. You said
Sure. My apologies.
Tell us the scenario. Yeah.
Sure. On Tuesday, so starting September 7th, after your teaching tonight, we will have a discussion group. And it's Tuesdays on the Path, Discovering Buddhism. And we'll have a meditation and discussion group about the topics for tonight. And then this will happen every week. So we have 4 teachings with you. We will have 4 Tuesday sessions. And then we also have 1 intensive practice day of meditation on a Sunday. That would be the last day of the, about the last Sunday of the month. And that's basically the program. And we will repeat this every month for 13 months. And the topics will change, we will develop, we will grow, our minds will expand.
Good.
And basically that's it. I did email everybody on August 26th, the reading materials and extra reading materials for this morning. So this is for the DB, this is module 1, Mind and Its Potential. Okay, so tonight is, or this month of September is Mind and Its Potential. And for tonight's agenda now, I'm going to give a little bit more information, and then we're going to go in to do a short mandala with Lars and Venerable, and then some refuge prayers and motivation. And then basically Venerable will begin her teaching. Okay. Because of our time, there will not be any breaks, and we will follow the lead of Venerable on question time when she is ready. Also, a couple of things Lars had already mentioned, mics off during the teaching, and if possible, if you could have your cameras on. I know Venerable likes it. I know we like to see you. It opens for more open communication between everyone. And let's see, 2 more things. At the end of the teaching, after Venerable is finished, we will do prayers for Venerable, long life prayers. And then after she does leave the session, I will stay online if there's any questions. So any of the tech.
Can I interrupt you, Tara? I thought it was going to be 90 minutes of me, then I finish, and then you've got 30 minutes together.
Lars.
That's what I think it would be. I mean, my feeling is, I don't know, I thought we discussed that, but I think it's fantastic to have the Tuesday. Really the best way to study, and this is how I did it, and that's how, based on the way they do it in the monasteries. And we all know when you've heard something that's in your, it's fresh in your mind then. So we've got a 2-hour schedule. 90 minutes of me is more than enough. I speak so fast. Yeah. I think the last 30, you can just kind of, you can have questions with me, but my feeling is the 30 can be like the last 30 minutes can be, you know, any other questions or going over things, or I think that's important.
Sure. And will you be here during that 30-minute time?
That's what I'm saying. I'm finished. No, I'm finished.
Yeah, after you're finished, that's absolutely.
So start your discussion in a sense then. Have that fresh in your mind, you know, and if you're going to be serious about it, like if we're going to seriously study anything, then you know yourselves that the rest, whatever the remaining part of the day is, you then go over what you've learned today. So then on Tuesday, which is 5 days later, you can still be fairly fresh. But today is the essential time when it's still fresh in your mind. I know when I studied, I mean, I'll talk about this when I start. I'll let you know, and I'll let you know the background of these courses and things, you know. Okay.
So I think that sounds lovely. Yes, Lars, I'm good.
Right.
Okay.
That sounds lovely.
We'll adjust and adapt. So
we will stay on longer than 10 minutes.
It'll be 90 minutes. It'll be 2 hours in total, but I'll be 90 minutes. It's more than enough to have 90 minutes from me anyway. You know, it's more than enough.
Perfect.
Okay, Diane, that's it.
With that said, I think I can transfer over to Lars and we can go to the short mandala.
But I want to explain what the mandala is. We all might know, we might not know. And it's really good to demystify all these things, you know. What we're doing is a very lovely meaning. We all know ourselves, if you go somewhere, your friend, or you go anywhere, you don't go empty-handed, you know. You make an offering. So it's really auspicious, this whole approach of giving, and that'll come into one of our courses. It's a very great meaning. It's very powerful. So here we are offering the mandala, which means the universe, basically. So if you don't know the Buddhist cosmological view of the universe, then you just visualize, imagine, use your creative imagination. Think of all the marvelous things of this world that make people happy, the objects of the senses, and you offer it to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. That's the meaning. It's very auspicious. So we can have it. We've got it. It's in this little prayer is in your prayer book. Like we've got two documents. One is the course notes, and I'll explain what they are. And the other one is these few little prayers there. They're there. So but we can have it online if you want to. People can watch it or just use your imagination. We can do it together. You're going to put it up on the screen or not?
Yeah, we're gonna put the center on the screen and also the text.
I mean, it's in our book, but I think it's good to have it on the screen. We can all share if
Yeah.
we want.
Christian or tech assistant will put it up on screen.
Okay,
Waiting for
fantastic.
him to find
And
it.
what's happening? So there's Nina. I think Nina's about. So there's Nina, and I think Nina at the center. She's going to actually offer a physical mandala. Are you, darling?
Yes,
Is that what
she
the plan is?
That's the
Okay.
plan.
Good, good, good. So the second prayer, number 2 prayer. Okay, so you know the mudra, the little mudra of the mandala. If not, don't you worry. So then you go on. Who's going to lead it? You
I'm
go.
gonna lead it.
Okay, good.
Good. Are you ready, Nina? She's just doing her prostration, so we just give it a second for her to be ready.
Actually, this is meant to be sung. Rob Priest, it says at the bottom underneath here that Rob Priest put this together, configured this in a way it can be chanted. So you know the English. I've never heard it like that. Have you done the English?
I'm going to chant it in Tibetan.
Fine,
I'm
that's
not
good,
really
that's
used to chanting it in
Okay,
English.
perfect.
Is that okay? Wonderful. And here we go. Sashi Perki Yukshin Meto Tram Ratlingji Ni De Dien Padi Zange Shindu Mikche Huwagi Rukunanda Shinla Jepakshu.
Just to interrupt, what Nina's doing, we didn't explain. The first thing she did was offer a representation of the universe. And now these next 3 things, what she's doing is offering representations of enlightened body, which is a statue, speech, which is a text, and mind, which is a stupa, which is very marvelous for us to create the course to achieve enlightened body, speech, and mind. That's what Nina just did. So this other second prayer, let me just tell you this. This is called the Inner Mandala, and you'll see from the words, it's very lovely. We're offering all our delusions, all our rubbish. And this is from the Vajrayogini practice. And I think the tradition for us is, Lama Yeshe started doing this at the very beginning when he first started meeting Western students. He got us to do this Inner Mandala. It's a very sweet meaning.
Right. And now we'll have the Buddha kindly.
No, sing the prayer. Sing the Inner Mandala.
Oh, sorry. I'm not really familiar with that one. Sorry.
It's the same tune.
The what?
Same tune.
Yeah.
Go on. You don't want to do it. Okay, I'll do it.
Yes, thank
We'll
you.
do the English. We'll do the, no, darling, read the English. Come on, just say the English words. It's great meaning.
All those objects of my mind's 3 poisons, coveted friend, foe, and stranger, body, wealth, worldly pleasure, without a feeling of loss, I surrender. Receive them, please, and free all beings from their bondage.
Go on.
Yes.
You're done. Go on. There we go. Very nice. So now I will sing the refuge prayer. Go back to the front. Number 1. There we go. That's it. So this every time I say, we start with this prayer, and every time I say the meaning of it. So keep it in a very practical way. The first 2 lines are for those of us who already feel we have identified as being Buddhist. So it's reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings and the Sangha. But the second 2 lines is stating, the Lamas would say, stating a motivation. We might say stating our purpose. Why we're here together for this 2 hours? Well, it's to listen to these teachings. Oh, no, this is not the right one. This is the one is general for your practice day. Sorry, this is a general prayer. Okay, I have to explain now. We should have put this one in extra. See the 3rd line, by my merits of generosity and so forth. This is the general words you say when you do the prayer at the beginning of something. But at the beginning of teachings, which wasn't the purpose of this booklet, we say by the virtue of listening to the teachings. And the only word that changes is the simplicity of Tibetan language. Instead of saying Dagi Jinsog, we say Dagi Che Nien, by the merits of listening to the teachings. We're going to say Dagi Che Nien. And we're saying by this virtuous karma that we're creating by listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha to benefit all. That's what we're saying. Sangye Chadang, Soke Chognam La, Jangcho Badu Dagni Kyapsuchi, Dagi Chonyen Gipa Sonam Ki, Drola Penchir Sange, Drobpa Shok, Sangye Chadang, Soke Chognam La, Jangcho Badu Dagni Kyapsuchi. Dagi Chonyen Gipa Sonam Ki, Drola Penchir Sange, Drobha Shok. And the first one was the English, which I said already. So that's it. Now we're ready to go. Thank you, Lars. Okay, dearest people. So the background to this course, actually, there's a lovely photo. I must find it. Someone just sent me the photo. I think 15 or more years ago, 17, 20, I can't remember, a group of us met in Italy at our center there to construct this course, you know. So it's obviously so we us Westerners, and so what we decided was that for the online those who studied as a correspondence course, when now we call it an online course, that each of those modules would be taught by a different, in this case it was a foreigner, a Westerner, not a Tibetan. So there are the 13 or the 12, whatever it is, the 13, I think, the 13 different class modules are taught by different monks and nuns and lay people, students of the FPMT. So this very first one, the course notes you've got, you'll see from the title page or the very front cover that they're teachings by T.Y. Alexander, one of our students. She lives, I think she's an American, but she lives in Queensland still, I think, in Australia. So the course notes are the actual transcript of a teaching given by each of these Western students, you know. So they're the course notes that you've got. So then on top of, so the course is given in two ways. One is a correspondence course, and you would hear the teaching of T.Y. Alexander, plus you'd have the course notes. Or two, in this framework, we're using, individual students around courses around the world teach the class, and then, and you could, so we're doing that here. I'm teaching it, but we're using hers as the basis. And so I really encourage you to read the course notes. I mean, she's over 6 classes, I think she covered it, maybe 4. So it's really helpful as an extra, because I mean, I mightn't cover everything, or I might say things more about one point that she makes points about another point. She goes into more detail about something. So I think it's really good as a background to study her course notes. And each of our modules will be like that. We'll have the course notes of whichever person taught it initially. 15, maybe even 20 years ago now, I can't remember. Okay, you people. Okay. Of course, these modules are all on this marvelous packaging of the Buddhist path to enlightenment that we know very well from our Lama Tsongkhapa Gelug tradition, which is us, is that this is called Rim. This is such a popular term. If you're a Tibetan Buddhist, if you come into any kind of Gelugpa center, you're going to hear that term in your first class, I promise. Lam Rim, And so what does it mean? And so, okay, it's what it means is literally path, gradual, lam rim, a gradual path. So that's a very nice phrase. We can hear it conceptually. We obviously know it's an internal path. We're not talking about a road to go from one city to another. We're talking about an internal path to go from here to enlightenment. That is clear. But I think the word that I find very powerful to translate it as, which immediately makes sense to us in our modern culture, is the term, Lamrim means a course. Now, the second we hear the word a course, straight away we understand what it means. We know that any course of whether it's a month course or a 10-year course in a body of knowledge, you know very well it's a gradual, it's incremental. You start at the simple stuff, you go to the middle stuff, and you go to the advanced stuff. It's completely taken as a given. It's not surprising to us, but I think it's surprising when it comes to a spiritual path, So I know that, and then so that when we first hear these teachings, especially from the very traditional point of view, I know my very first classes, my very first Buddhist teachings happened to be with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, who turned out to be my teachers, and I've been with them ever since. That was when I was about 32 or something in Australia, and it was a 1-month intensive course Lamrim course based upon the courses that Lama Zopa Rinpoche had been giving at Kopan Monastery, that them, you know, the Lama Zopa's monastery in Kathmandu since about 1971. I met them in 1976. So this was a classic kind of a Kopan course. That's how we call them, you know, this 1 month intensive course on this Lamrim, taking various texts from the commentaries over the centuries, and then Lama Zopa teaching, you know, the entire path to enlightenment. All I know is when I heard it, I mean, for 1 entire month, I sat there very happily, but I really couldn't comprehend what he meant. I understood the words, but I was completely drowning in confusion. I had no background. I had no context. I couldn't find how I didn't know what to do with this information, because you know, first of all, it's medieval, it's 14th century. I mean, the way the Tibetans teach now still is exactly the same as they talked in the Middle Ages. Honestly, it's not being rude. It's actually what's so good about it, because the teachings were kept so intact, you know, and then they were left alone up there in the Himalayas on their own without too much interference from the outside world. So it was really difficult. I didn't understand this arcane, abstract ideas. I had no idea what it meant. And I had no idea what Buddhism was. I had a few concepts. Of course, you make up your own ideas. And I remember saying to myself, where's the Buddhism? I didn't know, but I sat there. I happily sat there for 1 entire month, 4, 6, 8 hours a day, you know, knowing somehow there was something here that I had to persevere with, you know. And then eventually I became a nun 18 months later. And then I started work almost immediately with the publishing activity of the FPMT, which became known as Wisdom Publications. And so for 10 years, I worked for Wisdom, editing books and things. And I remember one of the main books we did, I began working on it, was Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, which is this classic Lamrim commentary that Lama Zopa Rinpoche loves to use. It's Pabongko Rinpoche from the 1920s, and it's one of Lama Zopa's favorite texts. And so I remember working on this commentary. Well, I was none the wiser about what the Lamrim meant, even though I was a nun already. I'd been already started to study the philosophy, but I still couldn't get my head around this vast 1,200 pages of these abstract ideas. And hear that it was a psychological path, I didn't understand it. I didn't know what they were talking about. And I mean, I edited it back then, way back then at the beginning. And it's only after years and years and years, if you try to practice, try to internalize this information, that gradually you start to get the taste for it, you know. I mean, it takes, and sometimes even some of us can be studying Buddhism for 20, 30 years and still not understand where everything fits. So with any body of knowledge, we know perfectly well that it's got to be coherent. But in the beginning, like if you study acupuncture, if you study cooking, you learn the simple details in the beginning. And then if you read by accident a really advanced book on the top, on you know, the most advanced, you know, acupuncture or most advanced cooking, you would see no relationship between that advanced stuff and the simple thing you're studying now, because you can't join all the dots. But we know that as you keep studying, if it is a valid body of knowledge, and I find this point incredibly powerful, if it is a valid body of knowledge, then as you keep studying it, you gradually join the dots, all the pieces will fit together. You'll start to realize the relationship between, oh, I see, now that means that. Oh, now I get that point. But in the beginning, of course, it can't make that sense. You've got to be very humble and patient. You know, so that's why, and this is the first point to look at, why we need to check very carefully before we launch into studying some body of knowledge. We have to see that it's valid. We have to check the teachers. In this case, you have to check the Buddha. You have to check Laksam to see if it's a valid Buddhist center. You've got to have some kind of confidence, do your due diligence to know that you're not going to be led up a garden path by some bunch of idiots, you know, because this is the tragedy about spiritual teachings. We don't take them so seriously. We think everybody's allowed to believe what they like, so we can make up our own, you know. I mean, it's an incredibly irresponsible kind of just hippie idea. It's a bizarre idea, actually. It really shows how we don't take spiritual philosophical teachings seriously, because it assumes we can't prove them. They're not like hard-edged, you know. But the point in the Buddhist teachings is absolutely, we take it deadly seriously, you know, to listen carefully. First check, do your due diligence, check up, and then have some confidence if you're going to commit yourself to move forward and study this body of knowledge, that you kind of got some confidence you're moving in the right direction. So basically what you're trying to do then is, because if it's, you're taking it as your working hypothesis. And then I say this repeatedly. It's so important to say this, that we're taking all this information as our working hypothesis. What else can you do? If you've never heard, say you've never heard it before, you've never heard acupuncture before, you can't possibly understand it experientially from the first second of hearing it. You have to take the theory seriously, having done your due diligence, having checked on the acupuncture, having checked on the teachings, having checked on the center who's teaching you acupuncture. Then you listen with an open mind, and you begin to listen first intellectually. There's three ways of, they talk about 3 ways, 3 parts of us are involved. The first is listening. The second is you think it through logically. And the third is you taste it. And that's what they mean by meditation, experientially. At 3 levels of your mind, listening, thinking, meditating. Any body of knowledge will be like that. That's the approach to it. There's a wonderful way the lamas have it. It's very sweet. The beginning of the teachings, that they'll say, don't be like the 3 pots. The first pot would be upside down. Well, nothing can go in. Your mind's so busy, you can't hear anything. The mind's too full of nonsense, That's no good, not helpful to you. The second pot not to be like is the pot with a hole in it. The teachings go in one ear and they go out the other. That's pretty common. But the third pot is not to have a dirty pot. So much negativity and so much upset and so much misery in your mind, every word you hear, because even if you've never heard it before, and as soon as you hear it, you're going, oh, don't be ridiculous. That's not be possible. You can't hear anything. You've got to have an open mind. It might be a load of rubbish. Buddha might be wrong. This is the approach to take. His Holiness said, if you listen to Buddha's teachings with an open mind, and then you try to put your money where your mouth is, you try to internalize it each step of the way, and at some point you find that what he says from your own direct experience, that it's actually mistaken, then of course you must reject the Buddha. So it's a serious commitment. In other words, internally, we're trying to prove. It's like acupuncture. It's like cooking. It's like everything. This is where it's really evident when it comes to regular bodies of knowledge. Everybody would think you were quite a demented person if you sat there and studied cooking for several years and memorized all the recipes and all the methods, but you never made one cake. You're a complete fraud. It's very obvious. It's like if you studied all that music, but you never play the piano, or you study all that acupuncture, but you don't put it into practice. We know that's pretty demented. Well, this is exactly the same here, And that's a danger. The danger here is it's easy with cooking. You can see the difference between a recipe and an actual cake. But here it's more difficult because it's the intellectual part of your mind is the theory part, and the experiential, which is what you get from listening, thinking, and then meditating, is when you get the direct experience of the truth of those words. And we can easily fool ourselves. We can be intellectually very clever. And that's a danger in our modern culture. I think the Tibetans very praise the brilliant technological intelligence of modern people, But it's a danger when you can kind of confuse intellectual knowledge with experiential knowledge. And this is the biggest danger. But the other danger is the extreme where you throw the baby out with the bathwater and you think, oh, I don't want the intellectual, I only want the experience. You can't have the experience without the intellectual. It's like trying to make a cake without knowing any theory. You'd make a mess, So the intellectual isn't a stepping stone to the experiential. Okay. So if you study the Lamrim, you know perfectly well that you don't start with the mind. You learn the mind. The Lamrim is divided into 3 levels of the teachings. And as we know very well, if Lama Zopa Rinpoche, respecting the lineage, would refer to the first stages of practice as the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, that's a mouthful. Well, you know what? I'd rather be cliched and call it junior school. And that's an immediate meaning to us. Immediate. It's the first stuff. Then you've got the high school teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability. And then the greatest capability. And then if you like, you've got postgraduate. So junior school, high school, university, postgraduate. And it works actually. So you don't learn about the mind until high school. But why do we do this first here? Well, it's very clear. And this is taking as our precedent the way Lama Zopa Rinpoche started teaching modern people, which happened to be 99% of Western hippies back in the early 70s, who came to Kathmandu searching simultaneously for drugs and Enlightenment. Don't ask them why they were considered to be the same, but that was the way it was for ridiculous hippies, you know. Enlightenment and drugs, and you got both in Kathmandu. That was about 96, you know, in the mid-60s it started, and then the lamas, our lamas, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, were in Kathmandu by that point. Lama Zopa is a Nepali, a Sherpa, and at that time, in about 1970, he would have been 25, I think, 26. And Lama Yeshe was 10 years older, and he was from Lhasa, educated at Sarah J. Monastic University. And he had escaped, and in 59, 60, ended up in India. And then eventually he, at this place called Baksadur, this awful place, Lama Zopa said it was like a concentration camp at the time of the British in the north of India. It was a nightmarish place for these poor Tibetans coming from the rarefied atmosphere of the mountains, coming down to this boiling hot, you know, disease-infested place, dying like flies, especially from TB. Even now, Tibetans coming from Tibet to India get TB, you know. So, and then on this place, they were all sent there. The Tibetans were sent there. And then Lama Zopa came a different route to India. He actually is a Nepali, he's a Sherpa, and he's considered to be the reincarnation of one Nyingma yogi there, this Laudo Lama. His name was Kunsang Yeshe. So he was identified as a little boy, and we'll talk about him as we go. And then at the time in 1959, he happened to be in Tibet, just over the border. He was there at a monastery, so he had to escape as well. So he escaped via Bhutan, I think. I'm really not sure now, I can't remember. And he ended up in India, and he met Lama Yeshe at this. He was handed over to Lama Yeshe, because the tradition is these young Rinpoches, these young emanations, these tulkus they call, who have been recognized formally as the reincarnation of a previous lama or previous yogi or previous scholar or meditator. So Lama Zopa had been recognized as a little boy up in the Sherpa country. So he was given to Lama Yeshe to take care of him, like he became his mummy and his daddy. And so Lama Zopa at the time was 15 and Lama Yeshe was 25, I think. So they've been together. They were together since then. And then eventually Lama Zopa got TB. So Lama Yeshe took him up to Darjeeling, which is higher up, for the clear air. And that was in the mid-60s. And that's where they met their first Western student. And then eventually they moved to Kathmandu. And then eventually they got Kopan Monastery, this lovely place on a hill outside Kathmandu. Lama Zopa said that they were staying in this Gelugpa monastery in Bodhanath, which is a place where all the Tibetans they all love to go there, the special holy place in Kathmandu. And Lama Zopa said that Lama Yeshe would look out the window and he'd look up at this hill, and it was the Kopan hill, he said. It was this hill, because Kathmandu is in a valley, and one out in the north, I think, of there was this place. So eventually their first student, Zena, managed to buy this place, I think, or something like that. And they began the Kopan Monastery and began the teaching courses in like 1970, 71, I think, starting courses for these hippies, for these Westerners, which is how Kopan Monastery started. And still these courses go all year round there, up there now. It's now a monastery for a full Gelugpa monastery, accredited by Sarah J. You know, it can produce its own geshis, its own scholars. And just down the road now, there's a nunnery, and there's about 500 monks and 500 nuns there. It's a really amazing, flourishing place. The nuns are becoming geshis as well. So anyway, blah, blah. Yeah, why was I telling you that? Just a bit of background, I suppose. Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa. And I met the lamas in Australia, I mentioned, in 76 it was, in Queensland. And they became my teachers. I sort of fell into their lap from my first class, from my first teaching, actually, which is most convenient. So here we are. Okay, this Lamrim. So Lama Zopa would teach these intensive courses, these 1 month courses for years. They became known as the November courses, and they're still happening every year, mainly taught by another person, and then Lama Zopa comes and visits and teaches, you know. Of course, 2020 there wasn't one because of the pandemic, and 2021 there won't be one. First time since 71, I think, they haven't got these intensive November courses. Okay, so Lama Zopa taught this intensive Lamrim. And so the mind doesn't come until the junior to high school. So why are we teaching the mind first? For a very clear, obvious reason, because the Buddhist analysis of what the mind is and the Buddhist psychological model are so utterly different in many ways that we have to hear what Buddha means by the mind first. I mean, it's taken as a given. If you've come from Tibet, if it's a given, you're brought up in the bones of your being is the view that consciousness or mind is not physical, for example. That's just taken as a given. In the same way that it is taken as a given, if you're brought up in the modern world, that your mind is your brain. So that's clearly very different. There's a series of fundamental assumptions that would be utterly absurd if we don't start with the view of Buddha's view of what the mind is. So this is why it's crucial to have this first. And in fact, the way Lama Zopa taught in the Lam Rim, he would start with this concept, this idea of the beginninglessness of mind. So we're going to discuss this today, you know, and the nature of mind. So mind, what it is, its definition, its function, where it comes from, its character, what you can do with it. And finally, the crucial one is, the long-term potential of the mind. So there's so many ways it's radically and fundamentally different from the materialist view of the mind. So of course, if we hear it for the first time, and especially back then when there was no concept, nobody really understood the book. I mean, nobody at that time, Western hippies, knew about Christianity, knew about Judaism, knew very well there was a piece of us called a soul. That was something, even if we weren't religious, we knew about such a thing as a soul. Well, it's Buddha's view isn't that view, and nor is it the same as the materialist view. It's a kind of a whole third way of seeing it, another whole way altogether. So it's crucial that we understand these things first, because the goal of being a Buddhist, the whole goal of being a Buddhist, if you're a Mahayana Buddhist, we're going to discuss the differences, it's expressed so beautifully by the word Buddha. We know this word, it's so common, you know. The etymology of this word is so delicious. The first syllable implies the utter eradication from our mind of all ego, all fears, all neuroses, all disturbing emotions, all attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, low self-esteem, misery, despair. We know that those words we are familiar with. And the Buddha has found from his own direct experience, because he's not a creator, there's no such concept in Buddhism. This is where he's radically different from the usual religious views that we're familiar with. This is radically different. A Buddha, Mr. Buddha of 2,500 years ago, is not a creator. Therefore, he didn't make up all this stuff. This is not something coming from, you know, he's not a creator. And this takes us time to get used to, but it's crucial to get this point. So this first syllable, Bud, implies the utter eradication from one's mind of all neuroses, all fears, all delusion, all ego, whatever. So this already is so shocking. I remember one class, a person who hadn't been to Buddhist teachings before, she heard this and she burst out laughing, and it's completely understandable. Because why? Because if we look at our models of the mind, based upon the view of the brain, neuroscientific views, then it's these parts of a person are totally normal part of a normal person. In fact, so normal that hearing that you can get rid of them all sounds as if you'll become insane. It's so bizarre to hear this initially, only because we have such a different view, that they're normal parts of a normal person. So normal, you'd be abnormal if you didn't have them. So it's quite shocking initially. And then secondly, not only can we rid the mind of all the rubbish, speaking very simply, Da implies we can develop to perfection, hear these words literally, everything else in the mind. Love, empathy, wisdom, compassion, kindness, you name it. This is speaking very simply, but it's astonishingly clear, you know. This is the goal of this course. You enter into this course, which might take you several lifetimes, and the end result will be you graduate as a Buddha. Rid of all the rubbish, full of all the goodness. Okay, that sounds pretty straightforward. It doesn't sound too complicated, but if we started to look into and go through the texts that describe the qualities of such a person, that's when it's become science fiction. Absolutely insane, I tell you. But we're not going to go into that here. So then we have to ask the question, well, who says? Don't be ridiculous. How do you know that's true? Well, this is the crucial point too about Buddhism. Where does all this information come from? This is something we need to think through carefully. Because if we're scientific if we're brought up as a materialist, have got a philosophical materialist view of the world, which is the prevailing view, the view that is considered to be the most intelligent at the moment in the world. You know perfectly well that this information comes from some intelligent person who looked at reality, articulated it, and presented his findings. So this is something, I always quote this in New Zealand years ago at our center there, Nelson. One person, it was a brilliant question. I've never had this question before or since. It's very fascinating. This man, and he happened to be a scientist, and he asked the question. He said, who revealed these teachings to the Buddha? Which is a perfect question if you take the view of religion being positing a creator, which is our usual view of religion. Our usual view of religion is it comes from on high. It comes from the mind of a creator. The creator made it up, and then you need to obey it. Roughly speaking, we have that view, you know, that it's created by somebody. So creator created me, created the laws, created the universe, created the, you know, that's the law. We talk about it as God's law. It was a perfect question, absolutely perfect, brilliant question. And my answer to him was, I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about, for example, relativity to him? And of course, he and everybody else laughed like a joke, you know. So it's shocking to hear this, because the Buddha's view is the same as the materialist view. Buddha is a, I'm not trying even to be sarcastic. I'm not trying to be cliched. I'm not trying to be simplistic. The Buddhist approach is this person called Buddha did this inner work. He was already educated in this amazing Indian system before him. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, it was these brilliant Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self, the nature of mind, the nature of consciousness. That's a big surprise to us arrogant, you know, white people, Western people, if you want to start speak like that. We think it was Mr. Freud 100 years ago. I mean, it's like embarrassing. But it's only really now we are discovering this, you know. So he came out of this amazing tradition. And the point of every word in Buddhism, every word, if it is valid, like Einstein, it has to have come from the direct experience of a person's mind. Einstein observed, and what did Einstein, and this is the point, what a scientist is by definition, and this is the approach in Buddhism. Einstein, an example of a scientist, is a person who observes with their intelligence the world as it is, and then articulates what they see as laws. Then they try to prove them, and then they codify them, and then they present them. That's Buddha. I mean, I'm not even being sarcastic, I'm not joking, but it's a shock to us to think this, because we have a series of assumptions so deep about what mind is, that it's the brain, that we're made by our mummy or daddy, that we track our reality back to mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, and the monkeys. And that the idea that your consciousness can come from before is like a complete cosmic joke to us, because we assume when we say mind, we mean brain. So we have all these assumptions. And so when we hear the Buddha's view, they bump into these assumptions, don't they? So what are we going to do? We either don't like, you know, think Buddha's a load of rubbish, which is fine, or you reassess your assumptions. And you open your mind to these new ideas and take them as your working hypothesis, with the view of a working hypothesis that you work with it until eventually you either have two choices. You prove it to be right, or you prove it to be wrong. That's the Buddha's approach. So you've got to be prepared to find Buddha wrong. It's okay. As Dalai Lama said, you study and you practice and you move along step by step. And if you do discover at some point he is wrong, of course you must reject him. It's very clear. Same as Einstein. This is the approach. So we can relax, you know. Just that our trouble is we have a panic attack when we hear views we don't like. We hear views that are opposite to our own views. We can't stand it, you know. So we've got to have a very brave mind. So if the words you're going to be hearing from my mouth in this 13 months or 1 month, as long as you can last, maybe 1 day is enough for you, have any valid basis, because you're going to hear them in a rough voice with an Australian accent, you know, very fast, you're going to have to check on them. You have to check. There's no shortcut, okay? There is no shortcut. We're sort of hungry and greedy and want to get it all now, you know. Well, I'm sorry, if you're very bright and you've done it before in a past life and you come into this life fully developed, then you'll get it now. It's okay. So one step at a time, you know, one step at a time. So the goal, the end result of all this path, this lam rim, this course, is to turn yourself into a Buddha, to mold your mind into the mind of a Buddha. We can mold our mind into any shape we like, Lama Zopa says. To mold your mind into the mind of a Buddha. Speaking very simply, so if you keep this in mind, it's a very simple job you're trying to do. You're trying to lessen if a Buddha is free of the rubbish and full of the goodness, it's fairly evident that the central job, the key job, the heart job of a Buddhist is to be able to distinguish between the nonsense and the virtues. Now that only really starts in high school. It only really starts in high school, that job. We've got a lot of background work to do first, and we're going to go into all this. But first we have to discover what the mind is, which is the thing that we're working on, which is the thing that becomes a Buddha. So what are the views of the mind as far as the Buddhist concern? And the fact is, in Buddhist views, there are many different views. So here the views are from the Tibetan tradition. More specifically, in the Tibetan tradition, they're from the Gelug. They're generally speaking considered to be four main traditions that have been cultivated over the centuries in Tibet since about the 7th century. And there are many sub-views even within those. So my sources are Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe. They're Gelug. They were trained in the Sarah J monastic university system, this monastery that was in Lhasa, that is now in South India. And then His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and my other teachers, which are all coming and track themselves back in all of Tibet. All the teachings track themselves back to what the Dalai Lama always talks about is the Nalanda tradition, this amazing monastic university in India, just near Rajgir, near Vulture Peak, where Buddha gave many of his teachings in north of India, the north of India. Buddha spent most of his time in the north of India. This amazing monastic university, the ruins there now, maybe only a small percentage of the ruins have been revealed, you know, whatever. And we go there, you know, when we do these for about 20 years now, we've been leading pilgrimages, haven't done one for 2 years, to India, to India and Nepal, which raised money for Liberation Prison Project. And it's a wonderful journey. If we do another one, let's hope we do soon. But one of the places we visit is Rajgir up on Vulture Peak, where Lord Buddha taught many things, including the Heart Sutra. And then secondly, near there is Nalanda Monastery. So this is this amazing place that flourished 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century, whatever. And then, and that's where, you know, the great Indian scholars took it with them in their minds to Tibet. So it's been kept extant and living and delicious in Tibet for these 1200 years now. We are the Nalanda tradition, as His Holiness says, you know. And of course, all these track themselves back to the Buddha himself. So, okay, so this is the Mahayana point of view. There's Mahayana teachings and Hinayana teachings. There's a lovely analogy that I repeat that I say 1,000 times. It's so delicious. It's that a bird needs 2 wings, wisdom and compassion. So the wisdom wing is like junior school and high school. And that's the Theravadan path. If you're in Burma or Thailand, you'd study the wisdom wing, and then you'd finish there and you'd graduate and you'd achieve your own nirvana and you're out of here, baby. If you're on the Mahayana path, you go to university level where you achieve bodhicitta, and that's the compassion wing. I'll use this analogy a lot. It's very delicious. So here we're on the wisdom wing. We're on the Mahayana path. Our goal is Buddhahood. And you start at the wisdom wing, obviously, as junior school and high school. But here we're discussing the mind in general. So, okay, from this point of view then, from the Mahayana point of view, and there are various schools of thought within that. So from the point of view that I'm taught from my teachers, it's the Madhyamika view. They talk about the Madhyamika view. The mind, number one, mind is used synonymously with the word consciousness. Fundamental point. They're used in different contexts, but mind and consciousness are synonymous, first. Second, fundamental point. The whole of Buddhism would collapse into a heap of absurdity if this can be proved to be wrong. Mind ain't physical. It's not the brain. It is not physical. This is something that's so shocking, especially if we studied neuroscience, you know, and this is not meant to contradict neuroscience. That's why these amazing conferences this last 20, 30, maybe 40 years now, His Holiness and all the best brains in the Tibetan Buddhist Tibetan Buddhist system have been having these marvelous conversations with the best brains in the modern world, in the scientific world, and of course finding incredible common ground, finding a way where these two seemingly opposite systems can become together and integrated. And there's marvelous things published. It's quite popular, all these approaches now. So, but for the Buddha, it's crystal clear. Consciousness, by definition, is not physical. Now, I mean, without insulting neuroscientists, I would say this would be pretty valid, that what goes on in the brain is a physical indicator of what is going on in the mind. It's the best way to put it, but only at the subtle level, only at the gross level, because the next point about the mind, and this is where it's absolutely cannot be proved in the materialist view, but they're trying very hard now, using systems, using methods, communicating, people who are working on this with His Holiness, that consciousness has got much subtler levels of cognition, because the function of mind is cognition, to be aware, to know, to cognize. That mind has subtler levels of cognition that we absolutely do not posit as existing in the modern neuroscientific views. Grosser consciousness, grosser levels of consciousness, yes, function inextricably, linked to the brain, to the physical. Mental and physical are inextricably linked. There's no argument about that. But we have these subtle levels of mind that are not a function of any, don't have physical equivalence. Put it that way. And this is something that the Hindus discovered. This is not even Buddhist. The Hindus were the ones these genius Hindu scholars and yogis before the Buddha. They're the ones that cultivated this unbelievably brilliant psychological skill that the world knows, that's known technically as single-pointed concentration, the accomplishment of which is known as samadhi, concentration in Sanskrit. The technique that's broadly known that cultivates that is known as the technique that's called calm abiding, or in Tibetan, in Sanskrit, shamatha. This is becoming super popular in the modern world now. The vague term mindfulness meditation is kind of based upon this technique. This is cultivated by the Indians before the Buddha. And this technique enables you, this is the point, enables you to completely subdue the grosser levels of your consciousness, your sensory consciousness, and your gross conceptuality. And we're going to go into detail. This is going to be the main substance of our 4 classes about the mind, the actual psychological model of the mind, according to the Buddha. But these grosser levels of our sensory consciousness and our conceptuality, which are the levels of mind that we function at, which are taking a tantric model, which is very helpful, and we're going to discuss this. We've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, and very subtle consciousness. This levels, this spectrum of capacity for cognition, from the grossest level, sensory and conceptuality, and that's the level we live at, and that's all we posit pretty much, to these subtle levels of consciousness, to even to very subtle level. And this is described in great detail, and we'll be touching on that in this topic, even though this is, if it'll be coming from Tantra, but it's very helpful. And we go into detail in this in the module on death. It's described in great detail. So we've got these subtler levels of mind, and this is something we have to posit for Buddhism to be coherent. Because like I said, if we can prove that the Buddhist view, is mistaken in asserting that consciousness is not the brain, or even indeed is mistaken in asserting that we have these subtler levels of cognition, which we can all access by cultivating this single-pointed concentration technique that's still living, sharp, extant, real. People right now accomplishing exactly this goal. People looking like you and me. If we can prove this to be wrong, then the whole of Buddhism actually collapses into a heap of incoherent nonsense. This is a fact. So consciousness and mind, broadly synonymous. It is not physical. It's the word that we can use to refer to your thoughts, your positive thoughts, your psychopathic thoughts. your delusions, your virtues, your goodness, your concentration, your compassion, your love, all these levels of consciousness that we are aware of mind we're aware of. It refers to those components. Mind refers to the subtle level of consciousness, instinct, intuition, unconscious, all these words. It's a spectrum of all your inner experiences. That is your mind. That is your consciousness, your sensory consciousness, eye consciousness. We'll go into this, is the part of your mind, which is not physical, that functions inextricably linked to the eyeball, so that you have a cognition, for example, of shape and color. Your eyeball doesn't cognize shape and color, your eye consciousness does, but inextricably linked and dependent upon a decent working eyeball. So body and mind are linked inextricably and are dependent on each other. But you can you have to distinguish mind is not the body and body is not the mind, but they're interdependent. So mind is not physical. Mind is a word you use to refer to all the rubbish, all the insanity, all the goodness, all the love, all the compassion, all the intelligence, whatever you want, all the inner part of yourself, all the way to this subtlest level of consciousness. Buddha does not assert anything called a soul, but you can argue, being very loosey-goosey, you can talk about the subtle level of your consciousness. And this is what we're going to go into, which the Buddha would say is what leaves the body at the death, and then programmed with the karmic seed you've done, all of which we're going to discuss, will then take another life. So if you're a Christian, you've got a soul, and that takes another life in either heaven or hell. So the idea, in a sense, that's reincarnation. The Buddha's view, of course, would say you can take another life as a human or even as a dog. We're going to go into all of this at some point. So this subtle level of your consciousness, loosey-goosey way, you can say it's equivalent roughly to a soul, but it's not, it's part of your mind. It's just a subtler level, that's all. It's a subtler level. You don't need another component. I mean, the Hindus call it a self or an Atman, this extra essential piece. The Christians call it a soul. I think the Greeks call it like an essence. Buddha talks about body and mind. That's it. So mind is not physical. Mind has got these much subtler levels of cognition that don't depend upon your brain. Mind is, this is another crucial point that is shocking. If you're a Christian or a Muslim, you track yourself back to God. Where do I come from? God. That's an absolute given. If you are a materialist, it's an absolute given you track yourself back to mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, and the monkeys. We know this. So in each case, you track yourself back to another being. This is really fascinating. This is the nuttiest thing Buddha has ever heard. And I'm not being rude. I am being rude. Buddha's very polite. It's the wackiest idea for the Buddha. And all I can tell you is the more you work with the Buddhist views, the Buddhist hypotheses, the more you take this view that your mind is your own. The idea that your mother can give you love, can give you being good at music, can give you anger is a very bizarre idea. It's a very radically different view, I tell you. So if you don't come from mummy and daddy, where do I come from? Mummy and daddy, where do I come from? God. Well, what's Buddha's take on it? Well, honey, he says, you come from yourself. Speaking simply. So this is how they talk about, they talk about the mind. Think of it as a river of mental moments. You have got a body and you have got a mind. So track yourself back. So, and there's a meditation you can do on this. It's a really good one. I think it's in your course notes. One of the meditations that T.Y. Alexander gives you is to do, called continuity of consciousness. We've got today. So you've got thoughts and feelings of today, and you've got a body. So think of your mind as like a river of mental moments. So each of the thoughts and feelings of today, you can track them back inexorably to yesterday, can't you? And yesterday's thoughts and feelings are tracking back inexorably in an unbroken chain of mental moments to the day before and the day before. And if you do this perfect meditation, you will inexorably, inevitably, and with absolute certainty end up back in your mummy's womb. And you keep going and you keep going, and you're going to eventually get back to the first moment of conception. So what's that? Well, in the Buddhist view, that's the coming together of the daddy's egg, the daddy's sperm and mummy's egg, that part we know. And the third component, the coming together of your consciousness. So in other words, if you track it back to, you get your consciousness in an unbroken chain of mental moments, you track them back. And you track your body back too, that they're separate things and they're working together. But you track your thoughts and feelings and emotions, this unbroken chain of mental moments right back to the first second of conception. So the question is, what about the second before conception? Okay, easy. The egg is in your mummy's body. Your sperm is in your daddy's body, and a creator has got nothing to do with it. Buddha is not a creator. He does not assert a creator, and he's not trying to be insulting, but we don't need a creator. He would suggest that the concept of a superior being, and Buddha uses the term superior being, but he says we can all become one. That's what Buddha means. We don't need a being. We don't need a person who's the boss, who runs the show, and who is a creator. It's a very radically different view, you know. So your consciousness, the second before conception, your consciousness, what is its source? Its source is the same continuity of mental moments that before this body, and a few weeks before that, it was in another body, and a few weeks before, and then before that, another body, and before that, another body, and before that, another body. So of course, what we say is, yeah, good, yeah, but where's the first moment? We all want a first moment desperately. We all want a first big bang. His Holiness in all his marvelous conversations with the scientists, and I'm paraphrasing here. Big bang, he said, no problem. Just not the first big bang, that's all. So as shocking and as bizarre and as confusing as it sounds, the Buddha's view from his own observation, not making it up, he observed it and articulated it like Einstein, is that consciousness, each of us, our own individual river of mental moments, goes back and back and back and back, and you will never find a first moment. Not because Buddha can't find it, but because it doesn't exist. This is what's hilarious. The Buddha's finding is that consciousness, and indeed matter, they're beginningless. There's never been a moment since beginningless time they haven't existed. This is insane as far as we're concerned. It's very, and we've got to look at why. The Buddhist analysis, and we're going to go into this as we go along, why this is so shocking, why we have an absolute assumption that there must be a first moment, and what we're constantly looking for is that first moment, whether it's the person or the universe, the Big Bang business. We believe there has to be a first moment. Now, if you're a Christian or a Muslim, there is a first cause. It's called God. Now, of course, if you're a smarty pants child at school and you say, excuse me, miss, who created God? You know that's an inappropriate question. So I'm not being rude here, because I mean, these philosophies, I find them fascinating and marvelous. The Catholics, I think, have incredible, intensive investigation into how there can be a first cause, capital F, capital C, which reinforces the view of God. I'm not being insulting. I think it's marvelous, all these philosophical views. How dare we be so arrogant about any human being who's bothered to think about the meaning of the world? But materialists are so arrogant about, religious people. And then religious people are so fundamentalist when they're extreme about everybody else. So this is our problem. But the Buddha would say why you can't find the first moment of anything, even the whole point about the physical world, as His Holiness said, Big Bang, no problem, just not the first Big Bang. So in other words, as far as the Buddha is concerned, one of the laws that runs the universe, Buddha, like Einstein, has observed the certain laws. Some people observe the law of botany and articulate it. Einstein has observed the laws of whatever he calls it. I mean, it's called physics, whatever it is, I don't know. Buddha's the same. He's observed this law that is the natural law, and it's called cause and effect. Well, hardly surprising. He didn't make it up. He's observed it. And there's extensive teachings on the logic of how if something were not physical, such as consciousness, how it cannot have as its predominant cause, as its main cause, something physical. It can't have. So His Holiness was asked about reincarnation. How do you prove it? He said, oh, that's easy. So, but it means using this logic about cause and effect, that if we posit this continuity of this capacity for cognition, which is not physical. Then the main cause, the substantial cause of that, I think there's different kinds of causes. I forget the meaning of all of them. Main cause, direct cause, indirect cause, substantial cause. But the substantial cause of something, the substantial cause has to be something similar, of the same substance to some degree. Okay, I mean, I don't know anything about science and how you can change different things into different things. I don't understand that. But the fundamental Buddhist view, which is the one that existed several thousand years ago, which is still, and it used to be something like this 1,000 years ago in the modern world, but now we don't talk like this at all. They talk about the physical world is made of the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water. There are detailed teachings about this in the literature, and that's still the view they use as valid. And then there's mind. There's only 2 types of phenomena. There's matter and there's mind. Matter is made of the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, water. And each of those elements is made up of components of all 4. They've all got their own function. The whole Vajrayana model is completely based on this. The Tibetan medical system is based on this. The same as the Chinese acupuncture, the Ayurvedic systems. These are based on this concept of the 4 elements. That's physical matter. So, okay, in Buddhism, there are fascinating discussions, especially when we discuss karma. We're going to go into this. And this is coming from the Vajrayana, but I find it not inappropriate to bring it in here now in the early stages. It's very tasty. It's very helpful. So in the Buddhist view, we've got a body and we've got a mind. There is the physical world and there's mind. There's minds. That's it. That's all there is in the universe. So the physical world, you track it back like the Big Bang. You track back even just anything you want to point to. You know, this thermos, it's physical. 4 elements. So you track this back to the stuff that was yesterday and the day before. You're going to keep going and you'll get back to the first second of the universe. And then, as His Holiness says, Big Bang, no problem. That's not the first one. There has to be something that Big Bang. I mean, I'm being sarcastic and silly. Something can't come from nothing, in other words. So cause and effect implies that whatever exists at this moment is the effect of a previous moment, of previous cause. So you can go back 40 million years in memory and remember your consciousness. This one came from this to came to that. And if you keep looking for the first one, where did I begin? Where did the universe begin? Where did the universe begin? So the Christians call it soul, God. God's the first cause. But not for the Buddha. It's not viable. Just philosophically, scientifically, it's not viable. And the consciousness is the same. You go back and you keep wanting. We're frantically, hungrily wanting a first moment. But that's irrational, Buddha says. It's just something we've made up due to our delusions. Because if you go back even 50 million years and you can say, got as far as that point, at that point, there was a moment of your consciousness. So where did that come from? There has to be a previous moment. That you will never find a point beyond which you can't find a previous moment. So logically, as nutty as it sounds, as absurd and laughable as it sounds, consciousness, your consciousness is beginningless. Now that means, you know, due to the Buddha's understanding of samsara and all this, we're going to get into all this, of universes and realms of existence and suffering and happiness and blah, blah, that follows logically that therefore matter is beginningless also. Therefore universes are beginningless. I mean, this is literally science fiction. Yeah, it sounds like science fiction. This is the Buddhist view, the Buddhist analysis, coming from the Hindus. So it's a very different view of the world. That is a fact. Lama Zopa would talk about the beginninglessness of mind. This is one of his first teachings before he got into the Lam Rim, and that's what we have to do. Because the Lam Rim is all about how you transform your mind. So you better know what we're trying to transform. What time is it? Okay, 1 hour. So I think so far I've said a few things, a bit of background, a few ideas about what the mind is. Haven't finished about the mind yet. Let me say more. It isn't physical. It is not the handiwork of mummy, daddy, or a creator. Big shock. And the experiential implications of that are what are most tasty. We're going to go into this. 3, it's got far more subtle levels of capacity for cognition. 4, it is not the handiwork of a creator or mummy or daddy or anybody else. It's its own continuity, which implies that whatever's in the mind, no one else can put something in there. So whatever's in it, I put it there. It's very simple. I brought it with me from before. This is the main point that the experiential implication of all Buddhist practice is based on, that my mind is mine. And you know what, honey child, I can change it. Lama Zopa says we can mold our mind into any shape we like. And finally, the mind, its potential, which is the point of all this path, is to become Buddha, to be rid of all the rubbish and full of all the goodness. That's it. So now I think maybe a few questions, if you'd like, on these topics. Not more, nothing more in it, just only what I've talked about, nothing else. Because we're going to, the 13 months, we're going to cover everything. So just on what I've talked about, are there any questions for clarity of definition or whatever you like?
And anyone may use the emoji to raise a hand or a signal with a real hand.
Yes, right, exactly. Well, talk to me, darling people. Would you like to say something? Anybody at all? Any questions? If not, it's really okay.
You can also put the question in the chat box if you prefer. Ah, I see Michelle has her
And
hand.
there's Wolfgang as well.
There we
So
go.
Wolfgang, Michelle and Wolfgang. So first, Michelle.
Yes, so you mentioned when you were talking about rebirth, that there is a time between when after death and before you get reborn, and what happens in that time. So
yeah, we'll go into this in the death module, but of course I can answer you now. We'll go into great detail. But it's been found from the experience of the great yogis who present these teachings that it can be up to a few weeks. And this is kind of this. The way they describe the whole process, which we will go into in the death process, you know, they've got these gross and more subtle levels of consciousness. So in between rebirths, you're at your mind is like a more subtle level, which is and the state is known as the bardo, or the intermediate state. And it's really just like a dream state. The experience is just like a dream, because subtle mind, the way they talk about subtle mind, is what we experience when we're dreaming. So this intermediate state is really like a dream state. I mean, dream in that same way it's experienced psychologically. It's kind of weird, you know, you fly and it could be very intense, could be very sweet. You haven't got much control over it. So it's like that. And it could be a few weeks. The experience of it could be much longer than a few weeks. We know very well with a bad dream, it could feel like it's about 4 eons long, you know, but it could be a few seconds. So the experience of it could be something else. But, you know, if you were clairvoyant, which you can accomplish when you've got single pointed concentration, and you could track your grandmother when she died, oh yes, now grandma's in the middle of the intermediate state, and you might be able to track it and know exactly when she takes a new rebirth. So that's a possibility, absolutely. It's called the intermediate state, and it's an experience of a dream state.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Michelle. Yes, Wolfgang.
Venerable Robina, why does the mind want to connect with matter?
Its mind is already connected with matter. There's no choice. It's been observed that that's just the way it is. So this is especially in the Vajrayana, they describe this in the more subtle teachings, Wolfgang, as His Holiness, you know, talks about in one of his wonderful books about the death process. It's called The Mind of Clear Light. And it's a description of, it's a commentary on this process of death. As he said, this is just the way it is, that all minds in the universe, and there are trillions upon trillions. And this is the other point, sorry, I meant about what the mind is. Mind isn't just confined to being human. The term this is just an aside point, Wolfgang, I forgot it. Mind, all beings that exist, and from the Buddha, there are trillions upon trillions upon trillions of beings that are, and our animals and humans are just a small percentage of them. There are different realms of existence, which we're going to go into. And these are all known as, the term in English is sentient being, but I think the Tibetan term is very delicious. And I'd love it if we could use the equivalent, the literal translation is mind possessor. Sem Chen, mind possessor. So there are trillions of mind possessors. Humans and animals are just the tiniest percentage. Animals are mind possessors. There are spirits who are mind possessors, hell beings, gods, all kinds of beings who are mind possessors. So the observation is the reality is that all minds necessarily are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. It's just the way it is. So this is where it's very fascinating. It's described in great detail in the Vajrayana. But when we talk about karma in more depth, we can go into that there. It's not as if mind goes towards matter. Mind and each consciousness is inextricably linked to its own set of the 4 elements. That's just the way it's been observed. It's not as if we weren't at some point, but we can't separate them. They're inextricably linked at a subtle and a more gross level. We'll go into this in much more detail as we go along.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Somebody else, please.
We have one question in the box. I don't see a hand.
Go on.
Rosalind, did you want to ask? Or I can ask.
Please.
Are you okay, Rosalind? I see you turned off your mic. Go right ahead.
Okay, I just wondered if you could explain, Robina, please, what the difference is between the subtle and the very subtle mind.
I think now isn't the time.
Okay.
But roughly speaking, okay, I can answer it briefly, but we'll go into more detail, especially the death process. It's very fascinating. Is that gross consciousness is really mainly our sensory consciousness. And we can see, in this to answer Wolfgang's point, it is really evident if we take this view that your capacity for cognition, called I consciousness, so all states of mind have a particular object or thing that they cognize. So the object of I consciousness would be shape and color. Shape and color. So at that level of consciousness, which is the grossest, most evident level, it's not a possibility to have a cognition of the I consciousness without the presence of an eyeball. You can't possibly have I consciousness without an eyeball. And then clearly you have an eyeball, but if it's functioning, it has to be because its I consciousness is working. So the I consciousness is what cognizes shape and color, but in dependence upon the eyeball. So even at that level, Wolfgang, you can't have one without the other. If you have an eyeball without a consciousness, then it's just a piece of flesh. If you have I consciousness without an eyeball, then it can't function at the gross level. Now, that's gross consciousness. Now, even our mental states, like all our emotions, they're actually really considered to be more subtle, but we have access to them in our daily life, but a very limited way. But then subtle consciousness, and this is sort of to answer Wolfgang's point as well, is inextricably linked with this subtle physical energy. This is from the Vajrayana. And so this is the Tibetan medical system. We've got this subtle 72,000 subtle channels, like a subtle nervous system that is physical, but is not evident to the eye, to the senses. And coursing through all those 72,000 subtle channels are this wind energy, the elements, but particularly the wind energy. And then linked to all of those wind energies are all the different states of mind. Clearly, this is a very different model, So your Tibetan doctor, when she feels your pulses, she will feel the imbalance of certain winds, and she will know that's directly related to your attachment mind. And that's why you're having so much anxiety, because the winds have got, like you've got a storm in your body. So your poor attachment energy is gone berserk. Now you look at a person who's angry, they're screaming, they're shouting, their heart is beating fast. The physical part of them is gone berserk. That's the grossest level of the physical. Why? Because the subtle mind, the mental state called aversion, anger, is very strong. That's completely driving those crazy wind energies, which in turn impact upon the grossest physical body, and you shout and yell and scream and spit comes out the mouth and the heart beats. The body's gone berserk. But the anger is inextricably linked to those wind energies. Then you've got, that's the subtle mind. So your dream mind is your subtle mind, and it's still got shape. You still have experiences and you see things, and you can even hear things with your subtle mind. That's not uncommon. You can be in a dream and you can know what's going on outside. You can be in a coma, which is your subtle mind, but because your senses aren't working, but you can be aware of sounds, and your subtle mind has this ability. But then your very subtle consciousness has got it's the subtlest level. We don't ever access that. That's super subtle level of cognition and super subtle level of wind energy. And that's the subtlest level of your physical and mental being. And that's known as the clear light mind. And that's what leaves the body at the time of death. It's the subtlest level. You've deconstructed all these gross, subtle, and all the way to the very subtle. And we never access that in our daily life at all. Does that help, Roz? Good. All right. This is from the Vajrayana, but I find it so helpful to discuss it, you know.
Thank you.
It's very tasty.
It
What
is.
else? Yes.
Um,
Any other questions there, Tara?
Yes, we have one more in the chat box, and please feel free to add one. This person's mic doesn't work, so I will read it.
Good.
If the mind does not have a beginning or end, does this mean that it is eternal, right? Can it be that time is simply an illusion of our reality? So what makes total sense that it is eternal?
Well, first of all, I never said a word about it being endless. I only said beginningless, but you're also correct in that sense. There's this particular, there are different views in Buddhism. Like there are some views that when you've achieved your own liberation from suffering, when you've cut all the delusions from your mind, they also say that your mind disappears. But this view that we're describing here, absolutely not. The mind is also endless. So sure, whatever word you like, if eternal, if that makes sense to you, then say the word eternal, yeah. So then, no, I mean, there's mind is beginningless and mind is endless. So that's why, what this thought about, what did you say? What was the second point? What did you say?
It was, yeah, a little more. Can it be that time is simply an illusion of our reality?
No, don't use those words now. But that's too,
Okay.
we're not going to use those words here. Time is there's conventional reality, and we're discussing conventional reality, but we're just discussing ordinary daily life, what mind is, what cups are, what toilets are, what good is, what bad is. We're discussing conventional reality here. And within the confines of conventional reality, we have a thing called time. It's not complicated. We have the present, we have the past, and we have the future. So we're not discussing illusions yet. We're just keeping it simple and keeping on the earth. We're discussing conventional reality here. Conventional reality. We'll get into the more sophisticated teachings at module 13 about illusions. So 13 modules to go, okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And does anyone else have a question? I don't have any more in the chat box.
Okay. Okay, so let's just summarize. I mean,
sorry.
Yes, please, Massimo. You talk.
Thank you.
Hello.
So you talked about life that it forms like, so I don't know if I understood it right, but I know Christianity says that like life forms a conception. I mean, when
Massimo, I'm not so clear what you're saying. Please do forgive me. Would you mind starting again?
So, okay. My question is, I know that in Christianity, so they say that life forms a conception, right?
Life what? Life what?
Life forms a conception.
Life
that means,
forms a conception. I have no idea what that means. Can you explain?
Okay, how can I explain this?
Yeah.
That when like so let's say like the sperm and the egg, like that it forms like science says that life forms after a couple of months, right? That like consciousness comes after a couple of months. But like Christianity's take on it is that like life forms a conception. That means that like life forms directly.
Oh, life starts at the conception in your
yes.
mother's womb. Oh,
Yes,
okay. Yeah,
exactly.
Buddhism would agree. Yes, the Buddhist approach, generally speaking, is that when the egg and sperm come together, the consciousness from before, due to all sorts of reasons, which we will discuss later, will then go to that egg and sperm. And why that egg and sperm begin to develop is because the consciousness is there. So I know the Jewish view is that the consciousness, that God doesn't put the soul there until a few months later. That's why from the Jewish point of view, abortion at a certain point is not considered killing a person. But the Buddhist view is what makes the egg, in general, what makes the egg and sperm begin to develop into the fetus is because consciousness has entered into it. So that the beginning of life is the first second of conception, broadly speaking. It's the consciousness, the egg, and the sperm all together.
Okay.
Are you with me? Are you with me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you, Mas.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. What else, darling people? Huh?
Nothing in the box.
Okay, let's just summarize then. Okay. I've given a bit of background about, well, this course, Discovering Buddhism, began, like I said, about 15 years ago when a bunch of us students got together, under Lama Zopa's instructions and put together this series of modules. I was a little bit a part of that, I'm sure not much. And then the course notes we're going to be using for each of these modules is the teaching given by these 13 different teachers. And they're going to be, the transcript of those published, which are really helpful. So the ones that we've got for this course are by T.Y. Alexander, one of our students, an American who lives in Australia. So it's really helpful if you study her course notes. That's the first thing. So then, and why we've got mind first is because we have to be clear, because Buddha's view of the mind is so utterly and so radically different in terms of what it is, its function and its potential, radically, and its source, so very different, and this is then giving us the basis of beginning to understand the future modules that we're going to describe, because they're all based on this assumption about what mind is and where it comes from. So mind is not, again, let's repeat, mind is not physical. The word is used broadly, synonymously with the word consciousness. It's not physical. It depends upon the brain at the grosser levels, not at the subtle levels. Although at the subtle level, there is still a subtle physical, like I described, the subtle winds and everything. There's still always the mental and the physical together inextricably. But the grosser level that we talk about in neuroscience, that's just the gross consciousness. So if you were to see a person who's accomplished single-pointed concentration, this samadhi, this calm abiding, this brilliant technique made up by the Indians before the Buddha, if you saw a person in full samadhi, they would look like they were dead, because they've accessed this subtle level of their consciousness that doesn't depend upon the brain to function. And that subtle level of mind has therefore more powerful, more subtle levels of cognition, which means what the subtle mind can cognize is more extensive and more vast than the gross consciousness. So we know perfectly well, for example, our gross consciousness, our senses can't cognize, yesterday. We might have a memory of yesterday, but we can't cognize it. We can't cognize the future, but your subtle mind can. Your subtle mind is way more powerful. And this is something that, still in our modern culture we find a bit suspect, but this has been around for several thousand years, This technique is several thousand years old. So mind is more subtle. And the other point is mind is beginning as an endless, and mind has this incredible potential. This is the point that is the basis of, is the assumption behind all these teachings, why you'd even want to begin to study Buddhism, why you want to even know about what your mind is and where it comes from, because you can change it. You can turn it into this marvelous mind of a Buddha. You can rid it of all the delusions and become this marvelous consciousness of a Buddha that's fully developed in all the virtues and the goodness and the wisdom. So I didn't say this before, but I'll say it now. So think of what your mind would be like when you're a Buddha, because your mind is not, you see, right now, our consciousness is confined in this body, isn't it? We're at a fairly gross level. We can see we're locked inside this body. We even believe we are only the body. Our body, we make the body the boss, as Lama Yeshe says, So our consciousness is in this body, but our consciousness is very limited because we're living at the sensory and the gross conceptual level. So we're so limited. And look at our senses. They're not very intelligent. They can't see very far, can't hear very far. The conceptuality, we don't remember 99% of today. We talk about how can a past life exist? Who can remember a past life? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. For me, it's 12:30 p.m. I cannot account for 99% of what my mind has done today, because our minds are so limited at the moment, but it's all we posit as possible. So we've got this gross level of conceptuality. We've got these subtle levels that are way more powerful. So when you fully develop your mind, when you fully develop your consciousness, when there's no longer any delusions left, what would your mind be like? Well, it's the simplest words. It would necessarily be wherever there is existence, because it's no longer confined by space or time or matter. It's no longer confined by ego, by all the grasping and the nonsense, which we're going to go into in this next 3 weeks. Your consciousness would pervade the universe. This is a crucial point about cognition. The Buddha's view is that consciousness has the capacity to cognize accurately whatever exists. So when your mind is fully developed, an enlightened mind, a Buddha's mind, you are cognizing that which exists. Your mind is in sync with that which exists. Your mind pervades the universe. Your mind knows that which exists. Your mind has infinite wisdom and compassion. This is a Buddha's mind. In many, this is the Buddha's view. Okay. So that's what we've talked about. And it's now 12:29 and it's time for me to go. So I can't force you all to stay for the next 30 minutes, but I would love it if you could then have more discussion between each other, do a little meditation, lead a meditation. Some of you, one of you, take one of the meditations from T.Y. Alexander's book, please, and do that first, immediately, even a 10-minute meditation. I really encourage you to do that, even that much. And the other questions between you, have a discussion.
May we,
Okay.
before you leave, do a long life prayer before you leave?
I think
Or
there's
your-
no need. We'll do it at the
Okay.
end of each, the beginning and the end of each module. We'll finish at the end of the module. It's okay.
Okay.
But, and I know sometimes I like just not even to sing the prayer, but just to say the words. So I just want to say the words here. Here we've been for 90 minutes, okay? Not a single second of what we've heard has gone astray. We mightn't remember it, but it's gone in. Nothing goes astray. So be very delighted about that. So we just think, this is a dedication prayer. We can sing the prayers sometimes, but I'd like to say the words. So just think, all these seeds we've planted, may we nourish them from this second forward with this confidence as we motivated that, you know, from listening to these teachings, may we sow these marvelous seeds in our mind, that so they'll eventually ripen, no matter how long it takes, in the development of our amazing potential, which is this infinite wisdom and compassion to be a benefit to others. May that be the result of these teachings. And may compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. So precious ones, over to you, and I'll see you in a week. And may this be the beginning of our wonderful time together. I'm so happy.